Most retirement rules start with a number. Here's how much you can spend. But when the market drops, they don't tell you whether you actually need to cut back. And if so, by how much? And then when can you spend more? I'm Ryan. I'm a CFP professional, and I help people transition into and through retirement. And here's what I've learned after doing this for years is that retirement doesn't move in a straight line. I mean, markets change, Social Security starts, a mortgage gets paid off, spending changes as you get older. So a starting number, that's not enough. You need a plan for what actually happens next. What can you spend each year, and what would actually cause that to change, either up or down? Because running out of money is obviously not a good thing, but getting later into retirement and realizing you have far more than you'll ever need, well, that isn't necessarily a win either. So let's start with the 4% rule, because that's the one that most people have heard of. So the basic idea is this, is that you would draw a percentage in year one, and then you increase that amount every year for inflation. And the goal is that you shouldn't run out of money over the course of about 30 years. Now, there isn't one number that everyone agrees on. It depends on the assumptions, and different researchers, they've all come up with different answers. I mean, Morningstar, for example, they recently estimated 3.9% for a 30-year retirement. And so in plain English, if you had $1 million, that's starting at $39,000 a year. But whether that number is actually 3.9%, 4%, or if it's something higher, the basic idea is still the same. It's still just your starting point. It goes up with inflation every year after that, but it doesn't care what the market actually did. I mean, good year or bad year, the dollar amount just climbs no matter what your portfolio did. And this sounds safe, but there's a real cost to this, because in a lot of scenarios, you can end up with more money than you started with, which again, it sounds like a win, but not necessarily, because some of that money may have been money that you never got to use. Trips that you could have taken, family that you could have helped, living smaller than you needed to, and then regretting it later on. Now, some people use a bucket strategy, keeping a few years of spending in cash so that a bad market doesn't then force them to sell stocks. And that's a reasonable idea. And I use that too when it makes sense, but it still doesn't answer the real question, which is how much can you spend? And when should you change that? Buckets mainly organize where the money sits, and by themselves, they don't tell you how much your overall plan can actually support. Then there's guardrails. The basic idea is smart. If things go well, you might be able to spend more. If things go badly, you pull back. But here's the problem, is that some of the better known versions set the main guardrails around your withdrawal rate, how much you're taking out compared to what's left in the portfolio. That's what drives the main guardrails. Now, by itself, that formula doesn't directly account for, like, if your mortgage is about to be paid off, or if a pension's about to kick in. It doesn't directly account for your spending being maybe temporarily high because Social Security hasn't started yet. Or maybe your spending possibly coming down as you get older. Those changes in your life aren't what the formula is responding to. And this isn't just theory. Wade Flaw, who's done a lot of research on retirement income, looked at this in a study that was published in the Journal of Financial Planning. And in the study's median outcome, not even a bad one, but in the median outcome, someone's spending after inflation was down by close to a third within 20 years. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the strategy failed, but it shows how big those spending adjustments can get, and why it matters to understand what the system is actually watching. So here's how I actually think about this with clients. So there's a zone where you're spending more than what your plan can support, right? That's the risk that most people think about. But there's another zone, a zone where you're spending less than what your plan can actually support. A better system will tell you two things: your upper guardrail, when it's time to spend more, and then how much more, can you actually spend? And then your lower guardrail, when it's time to spend less, and how much less do you need to spend? And those numbers, they're not set in stone. I mean, they get updated as things change, as you age, what inflation's done, how your investments have performed, and really anything else that's changed within your plan. Someone at 65 and that same person at 75 would generally have very different numbers because the numbers are based on your actual plan, your timeline, your income sources, not just withdrawal percentages. So how do you actually build a plan like that? Well, in my practice, I use retirement income planning software, which is called Income Lab. And it looks at your whole plan. It's not just one withdrawal percentage. And behind the scenes, I use the historical analysis that's in the software. And it uses historical market returns and inflation data, and it goes back about 150 years. And that way we can see how the plan might have held up through many different market environments. And it's not because we expect history to repeat itself, of course, but we do want to see how the plan might respond when things change. And what we get back is actually pretty simple. So we get a spending amount for today plus 2 portfolio levels to watch. And if the portfolio stays between those 2 levels, then the guardrails themselves aren't going to call for a change. But if it crosses one of them, then that's when we take another look and likely will be adjusting spending. We can also look at how the plan might have held up during periods like the high inflation 1970s or the 2008 financial crisis, just as an example. Think back, recently, like 2022. The market had a rough year, and sooner or later, we're going to have another stretch like that. And so what happens, right? So your portfolio is down, you're anxious, and you start wondering whether you should reduce your spending. But how do you know whether your plan is actually telling you to cut back or whether it's fear that's just making that decision for you? And this isn't just about down markets. Even when markets are up, a lot of people still don't have a clear idea of what that actually means for them or whether they can really, spend more. Either way, there's no system telling them what's actually going on. So they're usually guessing, and maybe they cut back more than they actually needed to, or maybe things are going fine, but they keep spending less than they could because it just feels safer. They tell themselves things like, I can get by on this much, I'll be okay on this, that's all I need. But when we actually walk through the actual numbers, the real plan, the real risk, everything involved, it's a system. And what would actually trigger an adjustment? How big would that adjustment be? I've had people who finally said yes to helping a kid with a down payment. And I've also had people that finally took the trip that they've been putting off for years. And it's not because their financial situation changed. What changed was really just their confidence in the plan. They finally had a system telling them when to adjust and when they didn't have to. So if you're wondering about your own plan, here's what I'd ask. Do you know what would actually trigger a change in your spending, either up or down? And if your plan said that you could safely spend more, would you actually let yourself? If you're close to retirement and you want a clearer system for knowing what you can spend and when to adjust it, well, that's exactly the work that I do with people. There's a link in the description. You can learn more and get started there. Or if you're watching on a TV, you could scan the QR code that's on the screen. The danger isn't always the market doing something scary. It's really following something that doesn't actually know you, either taking cuts that you didn't need to take or just living smaller than you had to. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.